in my 20s, raising kids. I have 2 children, and I've just for the first time gone to school full time and started seeing from the first semester sociology classes teaching social constructions theory and different things that, from what I could tell around me, were being sort of taken for granted as truth. And then, so now I'm seeing that trickling down to the elementary school level where my kids are going to school.
It's actually pouring down.
Yeah, and so I'm concerned, like, I'm not exactly sure what to do. In one case, a few weeks ago, I just kept my son at school because the teacher had said, this is, Pink Day tomorrow, here's a link to the organization. I looked through it, it's feminism, it's transgender phobia, it's like all these things. So I'm just going to pull them out because I don't know what they're going to be talking about, but it's going to keep going, and I'm not...
Every time the schools do something with your kids that you don't agree with, keep them at home. Simple as that. And do it now. Because this, the systems that produce teachers have become pathological completely. They're indoctrination camps and nothing else. That's my estimation. And the biggest sinner is the Ontario Institute for the Studies of Education, and it should be defunded as far as I'm concerned. They don't do what they say they're going to do. They don't. There's lots of room for real research into what helps children learn faster, and there's lots of things that are known and they're not being implemented in schools because it would be difficult. Instead, children are being taught this social constructionist ideological nonsense as early as possible so that it's well set into their minds. And this is also why the bloody social constructionists are going to go after the biologists, because the thing is, they know they've lost on the scientific front. They've lost. The data are in. Humans have a nature. It's biologically determined to a great degree. That doesn't mean we don't have free will, and it doesn't mean that we aren't also socialized, because clearly we are. But because they've lost in reality, they're pushing it forward legally. And that's part of the reason why I objected to Bill C-16. The policy documents around C-16 instantiate a social constructionist and really an appallingly incoherent and naive social constructionist theory of identity into the law. So, and the idea that biological sex, gender identity, gender expression, and sexual proclivity are independent, which they are not. They're not even close to independent. That's now written into the law. It's like, you don't do that. You don't write quasi-scientific truths into the law. You don't have to if they're true. If they're not true, you make them law. Yeah. It's appalling that we've allowed that to happen. And so if you don't agree with what's being done with your kids, tell your kids.
I started talking about that with my almost 13-year-old
yeah.
saying, this is what you're being taught, this is what I believe, and these are some options, and this is what I believe is true, rather than just hearing it as fact.
As soon as the state tells you that you can't pull your children out of school, it's immediately time to pull them out of school.
There's been a general assault in the last 25 years on solidarity, democracy, social welfare, anything that interferes with private power. And there are many targets. One of the targets is undoubtedly the educational system. In fact, a couple of years ago already, the big investment firms like, Lehman Brothers and so on were sending around brochures to their clients saying, look, we've taken over the health system, we're taking over the prison system. The next big target is the educational system. So we can privatize the educational system, make a lot of money out of it, and also notice that privatizing it undermines the dangerous, there's a kind of an ethic that has to be undermined, namely the idea that you care about somebody else. In a public education system is based on the principle that you care whether the kid down the street gets an education, and that's got to be stopped. What you have to do is exactly, this is very much like what the workers in the mills in Lowell, Massachusetts were worrying about 150 years ago. They were trying to stop the idea that what they called the new spirit of the age. Gain wealth, forgetting all but self. We want to stop that. That's not what we're like. We're human beings. We care about other people. We want to do things together. We care about whether the kid down the street gets an education. We care about whether somebody else has a road, even if I don't use it. We care about whether there's a child slave laborer in Thailand. We care about whether somebody else, some elderly person, gets food. That's Social Security. You care whether somebody else gets food. All of that, there's a huge effort to try to undermine all of that, to try to privatize aspirations, so then you're totally controlled. Privatize aspirations, you're completely controlled. Private power goes its own way. Everyone else has subordinated themselves to it. Well, that's part of the basis for the attack on the public education system, and it goes right up to the universities. In the universities, there's a move towards corporatization, and that has very clear effects. I mean, you see it at MIT, you see it everywhere. It means that you want to create just like industry, you want to create a more flexible workforce. That means undermine security. It means have cheap temporary labor, okay, like graduate students. Who don't have to be paid much and who can be thrown out. They're temps. Okay, they're going to be around for a couple of years, and then you toss them out and have some more temps. It affects research, strikingly. You see it at research. I'm sure you see it here, but at a research institute like where I am, MIT, you see it pretty clearly. As funding shifts from public entities, including, incidentally, the Pentagon, in fact, primarily the Pentagon, which has long understood that its domestic role is to be a cover for transferring public funds into private profit. When funding goes from the Pentagon and the National Science Foundation and others into to corporate funding, there's a definite shift. A corporation, say, some pharmaceutical corporation, is not particularly likely to want to fund research which is going to help everybody. Okay, it's not going to want to. There's exceptions, but by and large, it's not going to want to fund, say, basic biology, which may be a public good that anybody can use 10 or 20 years from now. It's going to want to fund things that it can make profit from, and furthermore, do it in the short term. So there's a tendency, a striking tendency, and a perfectly natural one, for corporate funding to institute more secrecy and short-term applied projects to which the corporation has a proprietary control on publication and use. Well, technically, corporate funding can't demand secrecy, but that's only technically. In fact, they can. Like the threat of not refunding imposes secrecy. There are actually cases like this, some of them so dramatic they even made the Wall Street Journal. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal last summer, you may have seen, about MIT, my place. What had happened was that a student in a class, computer science class, had refused to answer a question on an exam. He said he knew that when he was asked why by the professor, he said, well, he knew the answer, but he was under a secrecy condition from a different professor not to answer it. And the reason was, in the research he was doing for this other professor, they had sort of worked out the answer to this, but they wanted to keep it secret because they wanted to, make money or something. Well, this is so scandalous. Even the Wall Street Journal was scandalized. But that's the kind of thing that's the kind of thing you can expect, as there's a move towards corporatization. After all, corporations, they are not benevolent societies. As Milton Friedman correctly says, the board of directors of a corporation actually has a legal obligation to be a monster, an ethical monster. Their legal obligation is to maximize profit for the shareholders, the stockholders. They're not supposed to do nice things. If they are, it's probably illegal. Unless it's intended for some, to mollify people or something, improve market share or something. And that's the way it works. It's you don't expect corporations to be benevolent any more than you expect dictatorships to be benevolent. Maybe you can force them to be benevolent, but it's the structure it's the tyrannical structure that's the problem. And as the universities move towards corporatization, you expect all of these effects. And one of the effects, in a way I think the most important, is the undermining of the conception of solidarity and cooperation. And I think that lies at the heart of the attack on the public school system, on the attack on Social Security, the effort to block any form of national health care, which has been going on for years, and in fact across the board. And it's, it's understandable. If you want to regiment the minds of men just the way an army regiments its body, you've got to undermine these subversive notions of mutual support, solidarity, sympathy, caring for other people, and so on and so forth. The attack on public education is one example. Incidentally, I don't know how it's working here, but in Massachusetts, where I see it directly, it's not. There's a comparable attack on the state colleges. The state colleges, which sort of, they're for the, for working class people. People come back to college after they're halfway in their career. Mothers who come back, people from the urban ghettos, and so on and so forth. That's what the state college system has been. And they're under serious attack by an interesting method. The method has been to raise the entrance standards for the state colleges without improving the schools. Okay. So when you don't improve the schools, but you raise the entrance standards for the people who are trying to go on, kind of obvious what happens, you get lower enrollments. When you get lower enrollments, you got to cut staff. Because remember, we have to be efficient like corporations. So you cut staff and you cut services, and then you can admit even fewer people, and there's kind of a natural cycle. And you can see where it ends up. It ends up with people either not going to college or figuring out some way to spend $30,000 a year at a private college, and you know what that means. All of these are comparable efforts, are part of the general effort, I think, to create a socioeconomic order which is under the control of private concentrated power. Shows up all over the place.
There are many, many, many people who have no problem doing that, and that's why all these cookie-cutter YouTube channels popped up to take advantage of this. So how did Peterson take advantage of this? Well, he did so by misrepresenting Canadian Bill C-16, which simply added transgender people to the Human Rights Code of groups you're not allowed to discriminate against. Simply put, the law amends the Canadian Human Rights Act by adding gender identity or expression as a prohibited grounds of discrimination. That makes it illegal to deny services, employment, accommodation, and similar benefits to individuals based on their gender identity or gender expression within a federal regulated industry. A person who denies benefit because of the gender identity or gender expression of another person could be liable to provide monetary reimbursement. This prohibition would only apply to matters with federal jurisdiction. So basically, you're not allowed to discriminate against people because they're black. That was already on the books. You're not allowed to discriminate against people because they're disabled. That was already on the books. You're not allowed to discriminate against people because of their sex or because they're gay. That was already on the books. So all they did was add gender identity and gender expression to this. You can't discriminate against somebody simply because they're transgender. That's what Bill C-16 did. Well, Jordan Peterson began making a series of videos where he began misrepresenting Bill C-16. And I know a lot of you Jordan Peterson fans are not going to believe me about this because you watched so many skeptic channels unquestioningly spread Peterson's narrative without challenging it whatsoever. People just simply can't believe that all these skeptic channels would push Peterson's narrative if it was not true. But what you have to understand about these channels is they are no longer about spreading the truth. The entire point of these channels now is to spread their narrative that the left is evil, crazy, and the biggest threat to the world currently. And Peterson's misrepresentation of Bill C-16 fits into their narrative perfectly. It does exactly what they want to do. It gives them anti-social justice weird content to make, to rile up their fans, and to give them their daily dose of something to hate. Truth be damned. But here, let me show you how Peterson misrepresented this. This is actually one of the claims he made about it.
You can now.
In my opinion, the most meaningful change I can personally make in my niche is to expose what the crazy Christian conservatives who have taken over our government are doing.
Dusty, you've gotten rusty. Why are you playing those video games? Hey, Whitey, if Trump's in the White House, then why are you playing